marketing and AI. And if you haven't already done so, please visit prorelevant.com and sign up for more of these episodes and podcasts. I am the author of the upcoming book, The AI Marketing Machine, and you can find out more information on that at marketingmachine.prorelevant.com. And today I'm interviewing Andy Citizen of Share More Stories. And let me tell you about Andy. He has spent 30 years in emerging technology and has helped some of the world's largest companies move their business apps to the cloud that in part helped launch this current era. He's taken sabbaticals to reassess his career and realized humans weren't being considered as architects of our digital age, but instead are being considered as livestock. I wanted to change that, and he is now on a 8-year journey with AI and the human experience. And as an aside, he loves boats and using, restoring, fishing, and we'll love to talk about boats. We're not going to get to that, but I do have to challenge him on the fishing. I like catching more than I like fishing.
Mm,
And I will admit I was down in Belize and down there, that was catching. That was not
yes.
fishing. That was catching. Andy, welcome. It's so good to have you.
Hey, Guy, great to see you again, and look forward to talking today.
Yeah, absolutely. So tell us, what is your backstory on AI and marketing?
Yeah, so after you mentioned, I spent a lot of time in technology and mostly around business application of technology. I tend to work on technology that becomes products associated with revenue and not IT related activities. And so I took a little time off and came back and said, I'm a data guy, a lot of data showing up. And I started looking at machine learning and just getting more algorithmic and thinking one of the drivers was I wanted to think about the intersection of where human meets digital. I felt like we were just having an influx of digital coming in at that moment. This is, say, 2016, 2017. And I thought, this is the time where, we either become Jetsons or Terminator. Like it seems to be penetrating our lives. I might have used the word livestock. Boy, you use it one time and everybody's got to bring it up. I'm just kidding. It's pretty funny. And you're right. We could be livestock. I did say it. Um, and so I wanted to focus on that. And it wasn't necessarily AI as much as, what does it mean to understand what is coming at us? And AI just became a tool that made a lot of sense for me. So took about 4 months just to learn the math and the code behind it and, get into that space and start writing my own deep networks or deep learning networks and start to work with this startup here in town in Richmond, Virginia called Share More Stories, where we take stories, we process those stories with AI to classify, evidence of emotions and activities inside the stories we collect, along with generative AI tool sets.
Yeah, interesting. And because it's that evidence that you find in there, and the and using AI or LLMs to do that analysis has certainly changed things. So tell us a little bit more. What is Share More Stories?
Yeah, and I didn't tie that to marketing well enough in that, but Share More Stories, I'll do it now, is a group that, we came together to kind of help companies more deeply understand communities. So that community could be a product community. Maybe you're selling toothpaste or sports shoes, or maybe it's a community associated with a nonprofit or a minority community or a community hard to reach or middle-aged women, or just go down the list. There's communities of ourselves based on our demographics all over the place. So as we collect more and more in marketing, we are learning more about NPS and activities, and our phones are tracked and all this stuff, but it doesn't necessarily connect with us. It doesn't connect with us as a community. So we saw that opportunity to go in, and what we call that is a human experience, employee experience, customer experience. And when we started calling it that, not everybody cared. Like we started doing this 8 years ago, and it was like, "Hey, that's interesting. Why are you doing that?" And it was always interesting to everyone, but it wasn't always associated with marketing budgets or how people wanted the next initiative to go. And so It was a lot of starts and stops that as we built this business. But what's happened since then, where AI showed up, I used to have to explain what AI was to people, and now everybody at least knows a version of that. And marketing has obviously seen the light associated with generative AI. And so what we're finding is we take these stories, we look at communities, and we help people like chief experience officers or CMOs find a connection to the communities they care about. And, I'm sure we'll talk about those communities and how we do that as we go on.
Yeah, one thing that's always difficult, and now it's generally done by surveys and various in-market studies, and you kind of get like a lot of not maybe not a lot of bias, but you can get bias when you're doing a what's called a brand tracker. And
Mm,
one of the things you're trying to understand with the brand tracker is you want to understand what or how do how do consumers perceive your brand?
mm.
So does this brand make me feel young, or does this brand, is it aspirational or otherwise? Would something like that be part of where you could go with what you're talking about?
That's a great question. And you brought up surveys, obviously a great and well-used tool of all of us. Um, and I think one way to explain this a little bit is to compare and contrast the surveys, because surveys are wonderful. They've obviously served us all a good value. At the same time, they are limited at certain ways. And what I like to say, if you sum it down, a survey is a great opportunity to get answers to the questions you want to ask. What we do is in different as a different function is we ask people to tell us what they need from us and to tell us what questions we should be asking of them to better understand them. And so if you were an exercise company and you wanted to let's say sell a certain kind of energy drink, you could ask them what kind of shoes they wear, how many times they exercise a week, how do they like the drink. There's all sorts of survey questions associated with exercise. We might come in and say, why do you exercise? And we will uncover our that some percentage of the population does it for therapy, some of it does it to lose weight, some mental health, some some for energy and exercise, and some to just beat their sister at it, right? Like there's all sorts of motivations that drive people to exercise. And once you start to understand that more deep intent that we all have going into it, you have a lot of power as an energy drink person. Now you can tune what you're doing. You might even change your product as you get to know these things, but you have an opportunity to tune the marketing of that product to a more deeper connection to the people based on just knowing them better.
Well, and that's what's critical, especially for marketers as they're trying to understand, those critical perceptions that people have about their brand. And when you talk about the community, well, the community could be, my existing customers, and I don't know what kind of data sets you're using, but those data sets could be, I would imagine, your customer satisfaction or your social interactions, or what you find on Facebook, or what have you. Is that kind of where you're going?
That's a great point. We have friends that are ethnographers who I love it. They say we define the white space, and they get out and use all sorts of listening tools to find the people that pick up on products, for example. We do it a slightly different way. I would love to do a little more of data crunching on legacy data because I've always seen the opportunity there. But what we do today, and has been powerful for our customers, is we actually start by defining the community themselves. So we'll find that population. We've done minority travel through the old South, working with Virginia tourism and looking at minority travel and what's great and what's bad about that, how and got engaged with that community. We've studied that actually in all over the nation now because of those initial works and in the awards some of our customers won. We've studied middle-aged women and like what makes them tick, and found that long-term care was a big part of the challenge for these ladies. Very important connected tissue for every family in America, right? The middle-aged woman has upside, the older population, the younger population, husbands, kids, jobs. No one's more in the middle of everything. And so the population matters. And then we look at a prompt. What is the framing that we want to ask them about? What is something that is a dual tool? Not, we're not going to ask you something very specific, but to put your mind in a frame of a space that we want to hear from you, and then let you tell us what we should be asking you. That prompt leads to stories. Maybe it's a 2-page, 3-page, 5-page story. And what's interesting is, as we've started asking for these stories, I didn't I thought we'd get a little bit of it, but turns out like 70, 80% people, if you talk to them, will be like, thank you for making me get this story out. It was therapy to, we hear the word, it was therapy to write this story down all the time. So that is also a cool win-win for our customers, is that when our participants participate in the studies, they're already getting value because this company asked them to tell a story. They gave them a voice. They said, "Hey, we care about you," and that translates almost immediately, no matter what you do with the analysis. So we collect those stories from that population, and we do analysis on it. As you know, we do a lot of emotive-based or attitudinal scores, things like anxiety, joy, activity level, self-transcendence. But we also look at other things. And as Gen AI has shown up, we've actually built our own custom Gen AI tool sets to look at just those stories and just the demographics and the survey data. So we can go, hey, is there a group that is more anxious in this collective group? Like we study new hires in a very couple large companies. And as you study those new hires, is there a group that's more anxious than others? Is it a certain age group? Is it a certain gender? All those questions we can start to ask against these models to find, like I mentioned, the signal and the noise, or the patterns in the complexity. So that's what we do. We built our own data population, and we trained our models on much bigger data sets to be able to perform that.
Yeah, fascinating. And it is kind of interesting when you're talking about the signal and the noise, because in text data, it would seem like there's just so much noise, and yet you do want to get that one emotion or that one nugget out of there, and it's definitely in there somewhere. And using then a tool that can really sift through that makes a lot of sense. So now you have deployed and designed and deployed an AI-based application. So tell us a little bit about that process and some of the ins and outs and the goods and the bads and the and the goods, bads, and the uglies, I guess.
Yeah, let me try to tell you just enough that I don't put everybody to sleep. But we started. I when I came in the group, we were doing some of this work, and I initially put in a series of AI scoring systems. So what we do is we take these stories and then we evaluate it for, let's say we're going to check for bananas. I'm making up a hypothetical bananas. We're going to check for very low, I'm lost my word, occurrence of bananas in the story, to a very high occurrence of banana. That's called classification. So you can take text, photos, we talked about dog ears versus cat ears. You can classify, use AI to classify. And so what we do is we classify a score from very low to very high, and we're looking for evidence of something. I jokingly say bananas, but let's say more seriously, something like the word joy. We use the word joy. We look for that. Sentiment is always obviously one we do as well. And so we do 55 of those scores. And I originally wrote those. They ran on a Linux box that's sitting right here beside me, and they still run on that box. We can still do them there. But what we've done is actually move those to the clouds. So we have a cloud-based web app that collects the stories. It's a kind of a slick little tool that's simple but also secure. And what we do is protect each of the participants coming in are allowed to be anonymous. We validate it's a human through our recruit team, but then once you're in the system, you're anonymous. So if you tell us something that is, let's say, derogatory, and don't really get a lot of that, but let's say you do, and you're an employee, you're protected. There's a firewall that stops them from finding out who you are. So that it creates trust, and that trust gives us authentic responses, and those responses get processed through that web app up to the cloud and automatically scores every story. So if we have a large project, we might have, I'm not joking, 400,000 predictions run each project because of all the different scores across all the different stories. And to your point a minute ago, no matter how brilliant you are and how much experience you have as an analyst, in looking at stories and trying to pull data forward, you're not going to be able to process 400,000 metrics by yourself. And that's what AI is so great at. We can take that, look for the piece parts that are interesting, looking at variance, covariance, principal component analysis, all these different tool sets, all these little algorithms we can run through and pull forward and say, hey, you should look at this. This might be interesting. Check over here. And the analyst can take those points and move forward with them with speed and confidence. And so that's one thing the app does, but we've also done generative AI. So what we've done with generative AI, similar to what you guys all might have done, we have actually built custom agents to lock down on our stories and only our stories. So our stories, our demographics, and our survey questions that all go to these populations, you go into generative AI and you start asking questions. Give me themes, give me problems you see, issues you see. It's only hitting those 440 to 400, 500 stories. And we've proven out that primarily we have it locked down on that through a kind of a magic sauce that we've developed to get that done. And what's cool about that is our top line reports can go really fast. Our analysts can, within a couple hours, in a week into the process, start evaluating how things are going. They can also look at genders, biases. Maybe we got unbalanced data coming in. They can look at all those things. Finally, I'm going to stop with this and say that in that space, what I love to do after I've asked it all the normal questions, I'll say something like, "Okay, I've asked you a lot of questions. What do you see as has a significant piece of the content in these stories that I didn't ask about, that I didn't put any focus on? Tell me what I missed." And it'll come back and give me two or three things almost every time that I'm like profoundly affected by. I'm like, oh wow, that's cool. I mean, and so I get better. So I'll close it with saying AI is a lot about being creative and learning how to make the tool tell you what you want to learn.
Yeah, that's so funny because I learned that trick as well through one of these interviews, and where we're asking the questions. We know what we want to, what we're trying to achieve. We have the question in our mind, we frame the question, maybe we iterate once in a while, once or twice, and then come up with some answer that makes sense and is really very valuable. And then to, like you said, to go, well, what didn't we ask, or what is missing out of this, or how should we interpret this differently? And AI, I mean, it's so fascinating to see how well it does at giving that extra little bit there that you might not have otherwise seen. And it really can add a lot of value to whatever that business question you're trying to do. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
You mentioned livestock, humans as livestock. I love that term. It's kind of scary, actually, in the face of AI. And and at some point, excuse me, at some point, AI is going to be more intelligent. Maybe it's already more intelligent than us, and I think in some cases it may
It's not.
actually be. But in any case, when we consider humans kind of as livestock, how do we not do that in the face of AI? How does, when we're developing technology or going to put together some kind of a really cool business app for the enterprise, how do we make sure that we keep the human in the loop and the human as part of the result?
Yeah, I'm gonna hit this because it's a really important topic, and I've spent 30 years implementing systems that everybody said every year along the way. Well, in a year from now, that's going to get rid of all the jobs, and it was, at first it was the typewriter was going away for word processor, and then there was the Excel spreadsheets, and then go down the list. We've seen it for 30 years, 35 years, whatever it's been. um AI is it is the same, and humans still have a massive place in the use of them today. However, with that said, I will say it is the first technology that, if it does advance as it seems to be, it will eventually, it is training itself. And that is probably what's the most unique thing now. It is starting to train itself, and it is moving at scale so big that we can't manage. I will give you, go back to 2013. I remember I was at a big IT company and we were working with one of the big national banks, top five. And they were doing, I think it was 15 million trades a second. Let's say it's 150,000 trades a second. Who cares? A lot of trades per second. And I thought, humans can't process that. There's nothing that a human's going to be able to do to process that, right? How do we regulate that kind of movement? And that is where we're going with AI to some degree. We're going to have some scale issues to deal with, and we're going to have to we're going to have to bot ourselves out a little bit, from a standpoint of apps that manage that expanded beyond natural intelligence. Now, with that said, I think my full quote is: are we going to, if this all happens, are we going to be pets or livestock? And we'd all, I think, much would prefer to be pets. Um, I struggle to believe, and there's places on this earth today that we're not the top of the food chain. You go out and humans aren't, the number one in the list, right? There's a bear right around the corner or whatever. And so we may find ourselves not at the top of the intelligence food chain. And so that is an interesting topic that, frankly, I'm a student of, not a master of. I don't know the full answer yet, but I do think all along, and right now is a very important time to do it. We need human agency. We need to value that at a level we never valued it before, never had to value it before. But society matters. We need to, as humans, start making, and frankly, we did a better job of this at different times. Think of if you go back to the founding fathers of our country, we're at 250 years now, right? And if you go back to them, they were heavily trained in philosophy. They were trained on the Greeks. They were their skill set in understanding society was much more advanced than the average American today, which is sad. And I think those are some things we have to look at. We have to go back to what should we know, what should we care about? And I think that's both an educational function, that's a where we put our priorities as companies and organizations. And I like to tell people, get out, use your feet, make connections locally and physically with people, and help people. Don't have to help people, just meet with people, even if it's friends. Get out and connect, because we're having so much digital influx that I think it's disorienting. I think a lot of us find ourselves sometimes just in a kind of a digital oblivion almost. And it's just because you haven't done anything but one version of digital coming at you for 24/7 for 3 days straight. Break it, get away from it, find context, and then come back to it. Right. And I think we just have to hone that skill. We haven't never had to be human. We always just naturally were. I think we're going to have to work on that a little more overtly than we have in the past.
Yeah, it is interesting, and yeah, I wonder though if that's like a regulatory thing or if that's just a kind of a societal thing where we kind of train ourselves to make sure that we're not just using AI and being all digital and but we're somehow trying to inject our intelligence and our emotions certainly and our knowledge, our domain expertise into the equation so that it really does come out better than what it would otherwise come out if I did it alone or if the AI did it alone. It has to be 1 plus 1 equals 3 to really make a difference. Now, I do believe, unfortunately, just like with robots or with any kind of automation, there are going to be shifts in jobs, and there are going to be shifts in jobs where the bad jobs, the dirty jobs are going to be hopefully, automated. And then in a similar way, those things that are more rote are going to be automated. And even with knowledge workers where there's not necessarily rote work, but kind of simple work versus complex work, there has to be some kind of a shift just because AI is just so good at so many different things. But that shift doesn't necessarily mean net that there's going to be people out of work and stuff like that. I firmly believe that. Every other technological advancement has not led to a net loss in jobs. I think it's led to a net gain in jobs, but there has clearly been a shift. sometimes painful, certainly for the individual painful, but for the society or for humanity in general, the shift has been very positive.
Yeah, and I think to your point, a hook on that a little bit is that what you'll see is what it takes. In frankly, my job has changed in AI. I was having fun doing all this like crazy hard algorithmic stuff, and then here comes all the AI GPT AI systems, and now I'm writing API calls again. I'm like an API call for those that are not technical is you get a little call from another company and you type that call in with some parameters and they give you an answer back and so now the intelligence is happening on a cloud somewhere, and I'm just doing the calls to it instead of actually building that stuff. And that's happened in 5 years, time. So we always in the space it when of change is also obviously a big thing too. But what happens is like we as a startup, we as we've grown, we're probably going to hire slightly less people than we would have 10 years ago. And but there will be two more startups beside us that are so I think you start to see this broadening that is happening, on the horizon. And just think back to Andy Griffith's show, and how many show alternatives did you have when you were watching Andy Griffith's show live? Maybe two, right? Well, now there's 200,000 opportunities, and it's not only TV, but quasi TV and video and e-games, and people watch e-games for entertainment. And so we're just seeing this diversity happen that is I think going to continue to expand, and it's hard to measure. It's hard for somebody like Forbes to come out with a chart or the economists to come out and say, oh, the economy is this. Well, who the heck knows at this point, right? We've gotten so broad and so complex, and thus AI again will probably have to take over those kind of jobs so that we can find the synthesis, because we're gonna have to get good at synthesis. I hate that word. I struggle on it about every third time I say it. The synthesis of everything, because it's so much of it clogs the systems, right? And we don't see what goes by if we don't. I mean, I just one of the things that stresses me out is how little I see that goes by every day, every hour,
Yeah,
and it's a lot.
yeah, 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 absolutely. So one of the challenges, though, I think uh, where you were trying to get, 1 + 1 = 3 with AI and humanity or humans, and is that the the real value today seems to be in those people that have a good experience and understand the domain that they're working in, and so they can ask more intelligent questions, get more intelligent answers, and get and really truly reap that 1 + 1 = 3 kind of an equation. The challenge, though, I think, is where and what do up and coming new, in our case, marketers, what do up and coming new marketers do as they don't really have domain expertise? They may have general expertise or tool expertise, but they don't really have domain expertise. So, what kind of advice would you give to an up and coming new marketer?
It's a great question. I mean, I think that's always been true. Like as I hire right now, I mean, I have taught myself how to code in the languages I code in and web apps. I understand the AI side more than I do the web app stuff. And I can write code in it, and I do write code in it. But it's not the way I learned to write code. It's not the way my mind thinks. And so I'm always it's kind of like as they say when you play guitar, once you learn a bad habit, it's two times harder than to learn it the right way, right? And so I think some people, as they're coming out of school, whether marketers or programmers or whatever, they have been taught with a single sponge brain on a certain path and pattern that happens to be more attuned to the current moment. And that's always been valuable to me in the emerging tech space, is to work with those kids coming out of school that just naturally see it the way I need it to go, and then bring to them the domain through the more experienced staff. And so it's to me, it's more a function of keeping your culture supporting that transference, and to keeping the old graybeards like ourselves from getting stodgy. And it's I'm a big brain kind of guy. I've done this stuff. I've always broke my box and rebuilt it. but at this point, I'm starting to go, you don't do it as well as you used to. It's harder to conceptualize than I used to do. And so, you do slow down. And so there's a natural progress for people to get stale and rutted in spaces. So I would say in a marketing department, it's both. It's find mentors if you're new coming out, setting up programs that the program truly mentors new people coming in and also values, but also works to help the senior employees realize the value of these new resources. And I'm going to just take a little more time and say we did a new hire study recently, and it was a case of one first year. And then we did the hiring managers as two populations, and the third population was all the super senior managers, the VPs and stuff like that. And it was about imposter syndrome. And we asked that story, like, have you ever experienced? I can't remember the prompt, but something like that. And so, new hires, obviously, yeah, I'm scared. And then hiring managers go, oh, guess what? Me too, 5 years ago. And then the senior managers, by the way, guess what? Me 15 years ago. Absolutely. I was just like you, scared to death. I didn't think I was worthy of the job, blah, blah, blah. And the reason I tell you that story is those new hires coming in and then going to not only getting some of the reporting and analysis out of this, but sitting in a meeting, a workshop with those senior managers, standing up, reading their story and saying, hey, I was you 15 years ago. Those new hires are in a different place than a new hire that didn't get that, right? They're coming in knowing that they're worthy. They're good enough. They're just like everybody else. They belong there and want to be there, want to be, and the company wants them there. So those collective things get you started quickly and immerse you quicker than other tactics. And so, I think that's part of a new person in marketing. Bring your game. You've got something to value to bring, and work to connect.
Yeah, that makes so much sense. And I do believe that the value that an up and coming new marketer brings is, or can bring anyway, is potentially energy, but also that kind of knowledge that the older guys may not have been exposed to. And here you have kind of these digital natives, so to speak, and now they're AI natives, and they're going to be the ones that are going to be able to take something in one direction. I also think that as these shifts take place, and you see Amazon and Microsoft letting go of these engineers. Engineers are designed, so to speak. They grew up making stuff. I was an engineer, and I love to make stuff. And if I'm now let go and yet I have some really good understanding of something in the marketplace, I'm going to go off and try and make something. And so I think that, kind of like what you were saying, that now diversity of offerings and new kind of capabilities and what have you is what these engineers are going to be forced to shift to make stuff and become those unicorns that really develop and deliver value for the rest of of their business lives, but potentially also for society and humanity in general.
It,
Andy, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. I was gonna hook on that and say you're absolutely right, and it's always been that way. We come up with new ideas, we consolidate to save money and fire shared services and things like that, and then the shared services drops out and create new businesses, challenging the big guys, and half the time put them out of business. So, I think it's a painful process. I'm not saying it doesn't hurt, but that is classic Americana.
Yeah, that you are so right. That is classic Americana. Andy, thank you so much for being part of this today and adding to the discussion. It's definitely a critical thing for us to really understand and move the ball forward. So where can folks learn more about you and your company?
Yeah, Share More Stories is out there. We are on the web. My last name's Citizen. It's a pretty unique name, so it's easy to Google me and find me. I'm also on LinkedIn and most of the socials. And if there's some project or activity that you think we could jam on together, just reach out. Let's talk. I've always got a little time for something interesting.
Fantastic. I love that. Yeah, same here. One of the emotions that I see in our business is curiosity. So stay curious, my friend, is kind of where we kind of see ourselves, and it's that curiosity that says, let's turn over that leaf and see what's underneath it, because there might just be a real nugget of gold there. Andy, thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we're going to talk about boats next time.
Well, we're going to talk about catching and not fishing.
I
Thank you, Andy.
like
Appreciate it.
that.